So thank you very much, Richard. We're going to move now to Keith Foskey. And your question is, hasn't evolution disproven creation?
No.
Thank you. Excellent. So, Alan, your question.
Yield my time.
Yeah. Evolution, recently had an opportunity to preach. I'm still preaching in Genesis, but I recently had an opportunity to preach the first 3 chapters. I'm now moving on through chapter 4 and into chapter 5. So this is part of the reason why I'm answering this question is having recently done the exegetical study and those things, because I'm not a scientist. So what I'm going to say is from a biblical perspective and what I hope is true to science. I believe it is. So when we talk about evolution, what we have to understand first and foremost is that evolution is about change within an already existing system. Evolution is not an explanation of origin. Think about that just for a moment. Evolution does not tell us where things come from. Evolution is about how things change after they already exist. The law of biogenesis states that life comes from life. And omni vivum ex ova is Latin for all life is from life. And this is a fundamental scientific principle upon which we have built the scientific method. Atheistic writer Austin Klein said this. He said, "The origin of life is certainly an interesting topic, but it is not a part of evolutionary theory. The important thing to remember is that evolutionary theory is a scientific theory about how life evolved. It begins with the premise that life already existed, yet it makes no claims as to how life got here." That's an evolutionist. That's not me. That's that person. And Professor Paul Davies, who is also an evolutionist, said this. He says, "Nobody knows how a mixture of lifeless chemicals spontaneously organized themselves into the first living cell." Andrew Knoll is professor of biology at Harvard. He said, "We don't really know how life originated on this planet." So my point is to simply say this. If someone tells you that evolution is the answer of how life came into existence, that's not true, because that's not the answer that evolution is seeking to give. Evolution is about change within an already existing system. There's already life. And the only way to get life without some miraculous intervention would be through what's known as abiogenesis, or what's sometimes referred to as spontaneous generation, life coming from non-life. And if there's anything that's unscientific, it's that. There is no science showing life coming from non-life. Life comes from life. It's never been observed, and it won't be. So the issue for the Christian is really not evolution and creation. The issue for the Christian, I think, more is the issue of Darwinism. And I bring that up because evolution means change, and I think most Christians today believe that there is change within species, and there is change that happens, but Darwinism says that all of us came from a common ancestor. Now again, that still doesn't tell us where the ancestor came from, but that's the problem, is saying that we all came from a common ancestor. See, Darwinists see one tree with many branches. But when you go to the Bible, you don't see one tree with many branches. You see different kinds of trees. And that's the word that the Bible uses, is kinds. It says God made this kind, and God made that kind, and He made all these different kinds. Now, from those kinds, there's a bunch of branches, and that's why dogs can be little lap dogs, and they can be giant breeds, but they're still dogs. You know, Canis familiaris, they're still part of that same species. But they're a kind. And humankind and dogkind are not the same. This is why you can't, as much as dog breeders breed dogs, they can never make a dog that flies. They can make them have long legs and long hair and short hair, and they can do all these things to dogs, but they're still fundamentally dogs, because they're never going to have the DNA stuff that would give them wings And even if they could somehow create some kind of, movable parts that look like wings, they wouldn't have all the other apparatus that would require them to be able to fly. Because it ain't in the kind. It's not in their makeup. And so, when we think about evolution and creation, yes, we believe things change. Yes, we believe, even human beings. There have been changes in the human, think of what was about 100 years ago. The people who were winning Olympics 100 years ago. Today, high schoolers are pulling the same numbers in track and swimming and all these things. Why? Because our diet has changed. Our ability to exercise has changed. Our culture has changed. The muscles and everything have adapted. And so is there such a thing as evolution? Absolutely, in the sense that within the kind, there's all kinds of miraculous things that God has built in to allow for change. It's not a problem. The problem is when you say, because of those ability to change, we all came from the same common ancestor. That's not scientific, it's not biblical, and it's just not true. Darwinism is not science. Darwinism is science fiction. It creates a system and encourages you to believe it with a lot of things that simply are not so. And I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I would encourage you. Michael Behe wrote a book years ago, and some people love him, some people hate him. You know Michael Behe? You're familiar with him? He wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box, and he explained something called irreducible complexity. And irreducible complexity basically says that within any particular system, if that system is a structured system, that if you reduce it down to a certain point, you can't reduce it anymore for it to be a functioning system. And therefore, consider like a mousetrap. Mousetrap has 5 parts. It has the spring, it has the hammer, it has the latch, it has the base, and it has the actual, the unit itself, the catch. And so 5 parts that are all part of this mousetrap. And if you take any one of those parts away, it ceases to be a mousetrap. And so you say, well, what does that got to do with this? The question is how those things came together. And for what purpose? Without a designer, without someone behind the scenes putting it together, how did these things come together? And you say, well, that's a machine, that's not biology. Well, let's look at it from biology for a moment. Which came first? The giraffe has a long neck, like 16, 17-foot long neck. The heart of the giraffe is about 26 pounds of beating flesh to force the blood of the giraffe up that long neck to give blood to the brain. When the giraffe bends over to drink water out of a brook, that blood should rush to the brain and cause a stroke. But it doesn't, because behind the brain of a giraffe there's a interconnected series of veins which work like a sponge, and it actually absorbs that blood as it goes down and keeps it from piling into the brain. And as the giraffe lifts its neck back up, it comes back down. And so the question is, what came first? The neck or the sponge? Because if you have the sponge before the neck, why? And if you have the neck before the sponge, you die. So this comes to the question of irreducible complexity. God puts in these things that allow for there to be variation. And molecular biologist Richard Stallman said this. He said, molecular biologists and cell biologists are revealing to us a complexity of life that we never dreamt was there. We've seen connections and interconnections of complexity that are mind-boggling. It's stupendous, it's trans-calculational, which simply means it's mind-bogglingly mathematic. So when you look at the world around you and you see all of the various life, and you see all of the differences in life, and you say, well, that just came about by evolution. First of all, it couldn't have started with evolution because evolution doesn't answer that question. Second of all, evolution doesn't answer the question of how all of these changes came about in the way that they did. And thirdly, it reduces all the complexity of life in this world, including mankind, to a cosmic accident. The Bible gives us a much better answer and a much more simple answer, and that is that God created the world, and he created the world demonstrating his own creativity and his own complexity. And so I don't think there's a reason for us to give up creation simply because of the concept of evolution.
You guys have anything to add? Anything you want to kick around on this one?
Yeah, maybe I'll just ask you this question, Keith. I think you described this about using this terminology. I was wondering if you find helpful the distinction between micro and macro evolution.
Yes, but I try to avoid that language because while I think within Christian circles it's helpful, within non-Christian circles, people who hold to evolutionary biology and hold to it very strongly, they'll say, well, all evolution is micro. It's just a long period of time. And so they're holding to a microevolutionary perspective from their view, even though I disagree. I understand what you're saying. And do you guys know what he's talking about? Microevolution is change within a system, and macroevolution is going from one system to another. And they would say the way we get from one system to another is through billions of years of small changes. I disagree with that, but that's why the term micro, they're saying, well, we still believe in microevolution. It's just a long period of time. The problem is the period of time they're talking about is mathematically impossible. You've heard the example of the monkeys who sit at the typewriter and type out the works of Shakespeare. How long would it take? It wouldn't take any amount of time because it couldn't happen. It's not a matter of time. It's a matter of the impossibility of chance. As we have a book back there on a book table, shameless plug for the book table, Dr. R.C. Sproul wrote a book called Not a Chance. And that's the whole point of his book, is the idea that all of this happened by chance is absolutely and radically, it takes so much faith. That's the point. Evolution takes so much faith to believe that we are ultimately the byproduct. We're nothing but stardust. We're a sack of fancy stardust. And first of all, you know you're not that. You know you're not stardust. You know that you have integrity, you have humanity, you have person, you have soul. I met an atheist one time. He asked me why I believed in God. And I said, when we were talking, and I said, is that your girlfriend? He said, yeah. I said, do you love her? And he said, absolutely. I said, why? She's just a sack of stardust. I said, now, relatively, well put together stack of stardust, but she's still just a sack of stardust. What makes her important? What makes her valuable? Is it just because the chemicals in her brain just happen to fire the certain way that makes your chemicals connect? Is that all it is? Or is there more than that? There's got to be more than that.
And I just have a little follow-up I think that will be a good segue into Alan's question. Why do you think people so passionately fight the idea of creation?
You asking me? Or
Any of you?
I just don't want to take more than my time. Well, I think that's the answer, right? That if we can find a way that we got here without God, then we eliminate. It's as, and again, most of you are probably familiar with Answers in Genesis and those guys, and agree or disagree with everything they say. They put out a lot of good stuff. And one of the things that they made the point is if you can eliminate the first 11 chapters of Genesis from people's minds and hearts, that God created us, that we fell into sin, that we are responsible to Him, and that there is only the only way to be saved and to be brought back into a relationship with Him is through His intervention in this world. If you can eliminate that, then the rest doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think of just Romans 1:18 and 19:20. The unbeliever suppresses the truth and unrighteousness.
Amen.
And I think that perfectly captures what's happening here with evolution, with the unbelieving mind, because they don't want to believe in God and don't want to believe the truth and don't want to be accountable to God. So they suppress what they know. So they look for another explanation. As far-fetched as it sounds, as crazy as it might be, as unproven it is scientifically, they need to have something to help them suppress the truth and unrighteousness. And so they concoct this Darwinian explanation. And yet at the same time, on the flip side of that, atheistic scientists are so frustrated that so many people, even though they acknowledge evolution scientifically proven, or so many say that they believe that, they still want to give up a belief in God. They're frustrated by that. Like, well, you don't need that anymore. Well, that's because they suppress the truth that they know. Because that's what Keith was referring to. And God has put eternity in the hearts of all people. So they know there's a God, and they're accountable. They just try to suppress that.
Yeah, and when you subtract God out, I tell our people all the time, there's over 200 references to God as the creator after Genesis.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? I mean, it's just everywhere. So if part of your theology of God does not include God as a creator, you really don't have the God of the Bible. You're not talking about the same God. You've created something different. And so I think Christians can be guilty of kind of building a straw man and just shooting at the straw man, destroying the straw man. Well, I think it's equally true a lot of times in other circles as well. You create this God and then destroy it. It's like, well, that's not actually the God of the Bible, though. And I think you just sort of gutted your theology proper, your doctrine of God, and you got your anthropology too, your doctrine of man. You can't. Both of those are off if you eliminate God as the creator. So. Even apart from some of the conversations about the particulars of creation, God as the creator, that's just the baseline that Christians have to hold to.
Absolutely.
And I would even argue, out of nothing, ex nihilo is part of that as well.
And if somebody doesn't believe in God, they'll believe in anything.
Yeah.
I mean, look around. People believe in aliens. People believe in all kinds of stuff.
You don't?
That's another question,
No.
right? That was the third round. We're going to talk about aliens.
That'll be
But I mean,
question 7 if we have time.
On our text line tonight.
But
For
the
Pastor
guys
Keith.
who identify themselves as skeptics are obviously often the most gullible.
Yeah.
Because they'll say, I'm skeptical when it comes to God, but I'll believe anything about conspiracy theories and all these other things. Because I'll